Welcome to the first edition of the Center for Peacemaking's podcast called The Need for Courage, Experiments with Peace. Today, I'm your host, John Byrne, and we have with us the director of the Center for Peacemaking, Pat Kennelly. What we're hoping to do with these programs is both interview individuals that have done quite a bit in the peacemaking space. They've used both time-tested and novel ways to address pressing issues, and we have so many of them in today's world. So we'll cover issues that affect both us here in the U.S., but also global issues as well. So, Pat, thank you for doing this. I think the first thing to do before we expand on what we hope to accomplish through these programs is give folks a primer on the Center for Peacemaking. And it's been in place over a decade. Talk a bit about that, the goals of the center, and then we'll talk about some of the things we hope to accomplish through these interviews.
Well, John, thanks so much first for having me on and also helping host the podcast. I'm really excited because, at the Center for Peacemaking for 18 years now, we've been really focused on forming that next generation of nonviolent peacemakers. And what we're trying to do is really quite simple. First and foremost, it's training 18 to 22-year-olds to have the professional skills as well as the ethical development to use their immense talents to address pressing social issues in whatever field or geography they find themselves in. Then the second thing, because we're a research center, we want to really harness the power of the university and our really tremendous faculty to share learnings on how various problems, whether it's institutions that are under attack, the way social systems are working or not working to help people meet their basic needs, or how the demands of justice and human rights are being fulfilled throughout the world. And so we do that by publishing, and I think this podcast is really going to be a great avenue to do that. And then the third thing the center does, and it's one of the things I'm most proud about, is that we actually are down on the ground working in communities around the world. And I think throughout the series, people are going to learn about the diverse ways peacemaking is manifested, not only here in Milwaukee, but across the U.S. and around the globe.
So we'll cover authors, their research. We're also going to focus on how that relates from a practical standpoint. So we're not just going to produce research. This research has a goal. This has a strategy behind it. And you've already alluded to that. So part of what the center has done from my perspective, I want you to fill in the gaps here. As you say, you look at issues locally. So talk a little bit about how it works in the city of Milwaukee. You also have greatly expanded the mission overseas in other locales. Let's talk about that. But first, let's talk about how the center, with its students and with yourself leading the center, has worked with the city of Milwaukee, and what number one were some of the goals for the center, and where do we stand today?
Well, at Marquette, we're a Catholic Jesuit university, and so peacemaking's at the core of our mission. We want to care for ourselves and care for the world. And so that starts right here at home. And so, the Center for Peacemaking, in partnership with an organization that Marquette and Harley-Davidson and Advocate Aurora Health and Potawatomi Business Ventures and Molson Coors came together to create, called Near West Side Partners, really has been looking at the revitalization of 7 neighborhoods in Milwaukee. And what we're talking about is, how do you improve housing conditions? How do you improve safety? How do you activate commercial corridors? And how do you generate a healthier community? All of this work, though, is really, again, aimed at that. How do we care for one another? And so in looking at this is really what peacemaking is. If you're doing this work internationally, these same things would be human rights. How do people thrive? And, I'm sure in another episode we'll get into this, but, that project, it's been remarkable. It's sustained double-digit decreases in property and violence crime. A number, more than 36 businesses have opened and been sustained for over a decade.
So for those of us that don't understand the machinations that you mentioned, the bottom line is, when you bring in small business to economically depressed areas, it improves housing potential, but it improves crime reduction as well, right? You've found that as well?
Right. Yeah. We found, peacemaking generally, it's always saying no to an indignity or something that's going wrong, but you also have to have a yes. And so when you're thinking about peacemaking or economic development, community development, vacant storefronts, crime, those spaces become a magnet for things that don't allow a community to thrive. And so as we engage in this work locally, what we're always trying to do is saying what's not working, but then what are the solutions? And so how do you address safety? How do you do that? You get businesses in there, you activate spaces, you get people connected so they're creating community. And that's really what peacemaking is at its core.
So locally, the positives when we deal with a government that frankly is not as responsive, to say the least, to housing and affordability issues, you were very fortunate to have local leaders here in Milwaukee that, besides the small business community, elected officials who actually both agreed with your mission but worked to help you make those successful, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, we always stress at Marquette with our students is peacemaking is done as a coalition. It's done across sectors. And so for our work in the near west side, we've been lucky to team up with folks from across the political aisle at the state level, at local government level. I mentioned some of our big corporate partners, the tribal entities. And then there's also the nonprofit and our neighbors who all are coming together. And that, again, is exactly what we're talking about, a community. It takes folks collaborating, working together to say, hey, here is my slice of a solution.
Going back to what students can gain from being part of the Center for Peacemaking, talk a little bit about the curriculum. And then I do want to talk about international, because I know you've done a lot of international work besides what you mentioned in terms of local activity. But talk a bit about a student that decides to be part of the center. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of class content? What does it mean? What sort of students typically join this? Do you have to have a certain background or not? Like, talk a bit about that. How would you both recruit students and, once they're here, make that time here valuable?
Yeah, that's a great question because, often a student who walks through the doors of the Center for Peacemaking, their usual first question is, what is a peacemaking center? What can I do? And what we always say is, there's multiple front doors to peacemaking. So we have our students who they go through our formal academic program. They leave Marquette with a degree in peace studies, and this is always a double major. So they might be doing banking and peace studies, nursing and peace studies, English and peace studies, PT and peace studies. And what those students are doing is they're going through an academic program and they're learning the fundamentals of whatever discipline they're in, but then they're also applying a lens to approach that. So I always talk, if we think of our banking students and they also are studying peace studies, those students might be thinking about, how do I move money if I'm working in the finance world to, areas that are, in conflict and also being in compliance with laws around terrorism or other things. Similarly, a nursing student might be thinking about, how do I deliver the best bedside care, but also how do I think about systems so that, if there are cuts to insurance or Medicaid or Medicare, what's my obligation to address those systemic things? And, it's great. Those students, they go on, they, become leaders in the field. They're immigration attorneys, they're policy leaders, they're elected officials locally. But most of the students who come through the Center for Peacemaking, they're getting involved in these various initiatives. And what they're really doing is realizing that all throughout their life, they can be peacemakers. And I think, they'll go on our immersion trips, they'll help out with these community research projects, but who they're becoming is they're really becoming problem solvers. They're figuring out, again, how are they going to use their career skills that they're developing? And what these experiences do, especially we have a fellowship program. Basically, we give courage money to students to have internships where they're figuring out how can I both make a difference, but also grow professionally. And what those fellowships do is they allow students to both develop the skills to be leaders who are going to work for the common good, but they're also figuring out how can I professionally and personally collaborate in solidarity around issues that I care about.
I think that's the most fascinating part of what you folks do. Taking a sort of a traditional background and I come from the banking space, say banking, but also if you, as you say, look through a different lens, it can help you beyond sort of what are the normal processes of financial services. And a perfect example, you mentioned dealing with humanitarian groups. I know we were able to work with the center a couple of years ago to do a program on human trafficking. So that's a space where it's a horrific problem, but bankers have made the decision and they've pushed their leadership to say, you need to do more to track transactions that could be indicative of that horrible crime. And having the group from the Center for Peacemaking be part of that and explain to their students and the banking students, here's how you put those two disciplines together. I think that's an amazing part of this. Let's switch gears a bit and talk internationally. You've done yourself, and your staff have traveled internationally to various places, Japan, India, you name it. What's the goal there? I mean, the goal, I'm sure, is similar to what you're doing here stateside, but talk a bit about what the center does internationally and maybe some examples.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. At Marquette, we're recognized as a global leader in peacemaking. So all of our international projects are places where we've been invited to collaborate and work in solidarity. And really, it comes down to our Jesuit mission. We want to accompany youth for a hope-filled future and really walk in solidarity with communities. And so we've had a number of projects. We have a wonderful partnership down in El Salvador with a program of Velasco, which is a organization that supports women and entrepreneurs addressing mental health, as well as the University of Central America, the UCA, which is a famous Jesuit university. And there, what we're really trying to do is think about how does economic uplift of women and addressing mental health of families improve basic living conditions. And if you actually think about that project and what we were talking about earlier on the Near West Side, peacemaking ends up being the same thing domestically and internationally. How do you form communities where people can be strong? In Japan, where I just returned from a few weeks ago, we've really been looking at the issue of nuclear nonproliferation and gospel nonviolence. The Catholic Church, has recently returned to the roots, saying that nuclear nonproliferation is the way to go. And so, we're at the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing together internationally recognized peacemakers to say, how can we continue this conversation during a time when the U.S. and other superpowers are seeking to expand their nuclear arsenal and pulling out? And just yesterday, we saw the collapse of the nuclear treaty.
Yes, that's more than depressing, obviously. And so given the international scope and the domestic scope of what the center does, obviously that there's many practical advantages to learning conflict avoidance. We've seen what's gone on in Minneapolis and other cities from law enforcement agents that are not, in my opinion, not well trained to deal with conflict. So theoretically, people with a criminal justice background that also took peacemaking here would have at least, again, that lens that you talk about. So I think if we at the center can expand that lens to disparate areas of learning, then, it's maybe not going to stop the current person that's in their 50s in law enforcement, but the youth of today, the 18 to 22-year-olds, or even before that, high school students, if we can get them thinking this is a career path opportunity, add this on to whatever it is you want to become, and that would just theoretically improve the environment, the community, and what have you. And that's certainly a goal of the center.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you bring up law enforcement because we work closely with the Milwaukee Police Department, the district attorney, and others on our Near West Side project. And really, when we approach a problem, we do say we need everyone at the table.
Absolutely.
So if you think about public safety, communities are going to have some sort of law and order. But yeah, we firmly believe here at the Center for Peacemaking in Marquette that if you reach an 18 to 22-year-old where you can shape their values in terms of human rights, in terms of, the importance of people voicing their constitutional rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and other things, and that individuals who are in law enforcement have an obligation to uphold those, we are going to have a safer, better, stronger community. And that really gets down to, again, that community sense that everyone belongs.
That's right. And when I mentioned the human trafficking program we did, we had a Milwaukee detective part of that talked about his experience in working closely with both financial institutions and others together to try to improve that horrific area. So to your point, you need to have law enforcement definitely at the table. You need all stakeholders at the table. I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
Right. And it's accountability for all stakeholders at the same time.
So let's talk a bit about what we hope to accomplish going forward with this program. Obviously, we're going to interview professors here at Marquette, research folks, people within the broader peace community. We were able to have an interview, which we will post next, with Dr. Velez. Talk a bit about what Gabe has been able to do. Again, we will post that, but he came out with a book recently, but he's done a lot of work with the center as well.
Yeah, one of the projects of the Center for Peacemaking is we're really trying to reduce youth violence and address generational trauma and mental health needs. And Dr. Velez has been foundational in helping us do this work. We have a program called PeaceWorks that operates in a number of schools, and then a partnership called Scaling Wellness in Milwaukee that helps individuals heal after traumatic incidents. And Gabe's latest book, in addition to his work here in Milwaukee that I'm alluding to, he's also worked down in Colombia, and especially right after the peace accords came out, Colombia implemented a peace education curriculum. And so, in this book, he looks at, how do people make meaning of peace? How is peace taught in schools, and how does that impact the values and then, of course, the actions of youth in societies? And that's really, again, getting back to what we're trying to do at the center. You help people develop the skills, but also the values to live out nonviolent lives and build strong communities.
So besides the podcasts that we're going to be doing on a regular basis, the Center for Peacemaking does very frequent programming on Marquette campus and throughout Milwaukee. As Pat just mentioned, he's been on some international trips, and he reports back on what he learns there. Your website has a lot of this information,
right.
And you do send out a newsletter. I would say on occasion, because I'm not sure of the cadence of it, but can people either sign up for that or send you an email? How would that work?
If you visit www.marquette.edu/peacemaking, you'll see our latest events. We want to invite you to come attend the various lectures, see what's going on campus, sign up for that newsletter, which comes out monthly during the school year, and get involved at the center. And, like all organizations, you can find us on the various social media channels.
And next time we do this, both of us won't be wearing the same clothes, but we didn't compare notes before we did this. But I just want to say I'm really happy to be a part of this in a small way, to get the center additional spotlights within not just the Marquette community, but the state of Wisconsin, but nationally and internationally. It's just so important nowadays that we spend our time and energy both trying to, training maybe is the wrong word, but raising awareness for the next generation, but also the current generation. All of us have to better appreciate the importance and the need for things like conflict avoidance. So Pat, thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. And if folks have individuals or topics they'd like us to cover, please send those on to Pat. We do have a schedule of things we're putting together, but we'd be more than happy to talk to anybody that is part of this peacemaking process or adjacent to this process, because it's all in our best interest. So thanks, everybody.